The cue ball stopped less than an inch from the pocket, and for a second, the entire pool hall seemed to disappear. I could hear nothing except my own heartbeat and the faint hum of the lights above us. Across the table, Daniel leaned against his cue, watching me with a nervous smile that looked nothing like his usual confidence. Then he said the words that would change everything between us: if I sank the final shot, he owed me a kiss. What he didn't know was that I wasn't afraid of the kiss. I was afraid of what it might mean. Because for the first time in years, someone had made me feel seen, and I wasn't sure my heart could survive being seen again. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the possibility of finding something beautiful when you least expect it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need a little hope today. I had started working at the company 2 years earlier, carrying more emotional baggage than anyone there knew. My divorce had ended quietly, but the loneliness afterward had been anything but quiet. I had learned to fill my days with work, grocery shopping, laundry, and responsibilities, leaving no room for the dangerous possibility of wanting something for myself. At the office, I was known as reliable, organized, and almost impossible to read. I smiled when necessary, helped everyone when they needed it, and went home before anyone could ask personal questions. Daniel was the opposite. He was warm, funny, effortlessly social, and somehow capable of turning the dullest Monday morning into something worth laughing about. We worked on the same team, often staying late on difficult projects, but I had convinced myself that his kindness was simply who he was. Then came the Friday evening that changed that belief. Most of the office had emptied by 6, but Daniel and I were still finishing a report that had been delayed all week. When we finally shut our laptops, he suggested stopping at a small pool hall a few blocks away. I almost said no. My first instinct was always to go home. But something in his expression made me hesitate. It wasn't pressure. It was an invitation, simple and sincere. So I agreed. The pool hall was brighter and friendlier than I expected, with green tables, quiet music, and people laughing around us. Daniel handed me a cue and discovered something that made him laugh so hard he nearly dropped his own. I had never played pool before. Not once. I stood over the table like I was trying to solve an impossible mathematical equation, while he patiently showed me how to hold the cue. For the first time in months, maybe years, I laughed without thinking about whether I was supposed to. We started playing badly, then better, then competitively. Daniel teased me whenever I missed, but never in a way that embarrassed me. Every time I made a good shot, he looked genuinely impressed. Somewhere between the third game and the fourth, I realized I wasn't thinking about my divorce anymore. I wasn't thinking about bills, deadlines, or the empty apartment waiting for me. I was simply there, in that moment, with someone who made me feel lighter. Then he made the challenge. The table had one final ball left. Daniel looked at me, then at the cue ball, and his playful confidence returned. He suggested a little wager. If he sank the difficult shot, I would owe him a favor. If I sank mine, he would owe me a kiss. I laughed because I assumed he was joking. He smiled, but there was something uncertain behind his eyes. Suddenly the room felt quieter. I told him I wasn't making deals like that. He immediately backed off, saying it was only a joke and that I didn't have to do anything I wasn't comfortable with. That moment mattered more than he probably realized. He wasn't trying to corner me. He was giving me a choice. And somehow, that made me want to stay. I studied the table. The shot was difficult, almost ridiculous for someone who had only learned the game that evening. But Daniel had shown me how to angle the cue. I took a breath, bent down, and slowly pulled the cue backward. My hands were shaking. Not because of the shot. Because I knew that if I made it, something between us might become real. I struck the cue ball. It rolled across the green felt, touched the rail, changed direction, and moved slowly toward the pocket. Daniel stopped smiling. I stopped breathing. The ball reached the edge, hesitated for one heartbreaking second, and dropped. Daniel stared at the pocket, then at me. But I couldn't celebrate. Instead, an old fear rose inside me. I suddenly remembered every promise I had once believed, every time someone had said they would stay, and every moment when staying had become too difficult for them. I stepped away from the table and told him I couldn't do it. Daniel didn't argue. He simply followed me outside and stood beside me under the cool evening sky. He told me that the kiss had never been the point. The point was that he had wanted to tell me he liked me, but he was terrified of saying it directly because he knew I had been hurt. He said he didn't want to become another person who demanded something from me. He wanted to be someone I could trust. Those words broke through the walls I had spent years building. I finally admitted that I was scared. Not of him, but of becoming hopeful again. I told him that after my marriage ended, I had started believing that love was something that happened to other people. Daniel listened without interrupting. Then he told me that sometimes the hardest part of a second chance wasn't finding someone new. It was forgiving yourself for still wanting love after being hurt. I cried then, quietly at first, embarrassed by the tears. Daniel didn't try to fix me. He didn't tell me everything would magically be perfect. He simply stood beside me until I stopped feeling ashamed of being vulnerable. A few weeks later, we were still taking things slowly. We had coffee before work, walked together during lunch, and occasionally returned to the pool hall. We laughed about that first challenge, but neither of us talked about the kiss. Until one Friday night, after another game, Daniel placed the cue down and looked at me with that same nervous smile. This time, I didn't wait for him to make a challenge. I stepped closer. The kiss was gentle, brief, and completely different from the dramatic moment I had imagined. There was no audience, no wager, and no pressure. Just two people who had both been carrying invisible scars and had finally decided that being afraid didn't mean they had to stop living. Months later, I understood something I had missed that night. The real challenge hadn't been sinking the ball. It had been deciding whether I was willing to take another shot at happiness. And sometimes, life gives us a second chance in the most ordinary places: a workplace, a pool table, a Friday evening, and a person who simply refuses to give up on believing that your heart is still capable of hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support may help this story reach someone who is afraid to believe in love again. And before you go, comment, "I believe in second chances," if you believe that being hurt doesn't mean your story is over. Because sometimes, the shot that scares you the most